Welcome to another episode of Groundwork, where we interview the leaders building the most interesting ecosystem and partnership organizations in the world. And today I have Gil with me, and I'm extremely excited to talk about his history and some of the experiences that he's had in our industry. And so, Gil, maybe you could just start by telling us a little bit about your journey and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, thank you, Tai. Great to see you. Lovely to see you in Austin some months back. My name is Gil Rogoff. I'm currently based in Austin, Texas, and originally from the Los Angeles area. It's crazy how many career journeys you have throughout your life. And I might look not too old, but I've lived some lives. And I think Ty's that. I think that's how we ended up here. But really, I began my career actually in the advertising industry at Saatchi and Saatchi in their Los Angeles offices there. And fresh out of college, I was always very curious in nature, and I came across a role there through a relationship. And I think that's going to be a common thread through our conversations here is how relationships from many years or even early relationships could really produce really good outcomes and open up opportunities. And I came across an opportunity for Saatchi in the early days of media and social and things of that nature in around 2007, and I helped build an innovation and social media practice there, weaved in through strategy and media, with a focus on servicing their primary client being Toyota of North America.
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested to talk about that experience to start with. I think, like, for many people, myself included, like the first exposure to tech likely was through agency and services companies. You know, that like at least in that time when we were coming into the workforce, like that was like a really easy way. Like my first ever uh, role was an internship at an SEO agency in my hometown, and I feel like that was like the same avenue for a lot of people. And yeah, like I imagine at Saatchi and Saatchi, a shout out to Saatchi and Saatchi. We partnered with them when I was at Optimizely. But yeah, I think for many people that was their first exposure to the tech industry and space. Was that the same thing for you? Was that like how you first became aware of the technology and innovation that was happening, or were you already exposed to that before?
Yeah, in undergrad, I had a double major, and I focused in business with marketing and also communications. We with a bit of sprinkled of finance, right? And I think growing up, I would say that I always had a bit of this, extroverted energy and really getting out there, meeting people. But deep inside, I had a creative bug, and that's what drove me towards the advertising industry. And really getting inside, there's so many different functions within advertising. And when I came across this role where literally, in some ways, looking back, it almost was a bit of a venture capital style role within, woven in with strategy. The difference is that instead of us having LPs and a fund to invest in, what we had was giving an opportunity. We were at that point in time, Toyota was between the top 5 and top 10 advertiser out there, spending the most amount of dollars out there. And so we on my team were meeting with hundreds of different types of early stage companies, vendors, and even Google and Facebook early days before Facebook, before they even had a brand team, being able to try to do first to market alpha and beta opportunities. So my role there at Saatchi was being able to be very much left brain, right brain, thinking through the data, the analytics, what the ROI might be, but also what is the creative execution there? How could our clients go to work with these new technologies, whether it be SoundCloud as well, or who you name it, MySpace back in the day for those listening who actually still had a MySpace account, and being able to kind of blur the lines between, well, is this advertising or is this just association with the brand and them actually providing something of value? And so through that journey, met a tremendous amount of founders, which played a big impact in my career, in addition to leaders, in actually bringing to life a variety of different types of executions, having a hand in helping to produce and doing some of the strategy and getting the budgets for the first iPhone app that Toyota had ever created, and doing something with Prius, to launching a multi-million-dollar campaign with MySpace to do, release a new MP3 for people who used to download MP3s back then. I'm kind of dating myself, but I think the exposure and really being on the cutting edge of what was taking place within technology back then was extremely remarkable, and a really exciting time for us in general, right? In that time of advertising.
Yeah, amazing. And so, like, I know a lot of people would be really interested in hearing about that dynamic in that in that relationship where, Toyota is basically looking to you guys to be a key part of their innovation strategy, right? So, like, could you tell me a little bit about how that relationship worked? Like, all the way from, like, how much of that work was like relinquished from Toyota to your team, and if you want to talk about broad strokes, just like how these types of things work in general, and then all the way through to like uh, a little bit about like how some of these technology, like for instance Facebook or MySpace, or if someone wanted to get on your agenda so that they could like work together with you to get on Toyota's agenda, like how does that work as well, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, great. So, a bit of a two-pronged question there. I think for your first question, um, the reality is, especially for a lot of these brands, and some of my other roles after this, I got to be on the outside, being a vendor, working for a tech startup, and pursuing and working with a number of different types of companies like Red Bull and you name it, right? Other automotive companies. But when you look at a lot of these brands, especially Toyota, at the end of the day, they're in the business of selling cars, right? There's no which way you look about it. And actually, in many ways, they have a number of brands under their umbrella, right? Whether you're selling a truck or you're selling a Prius or a Corolla, there's lots of different stakeholders within the organization that are owning that. And then they'll have some subject matter experts that are more digital focused, SEO, SEM, so on and so forth. So the point is at the end of the day, there was only a handful of real instrumental people on the client side, and they would get all the reports rolled up. This is the initiative, this is the creative brief, this is the amount of money that we have in place. And you could have 100+ people at Saatchi all working to strive to come together to put a presentation, to go in there and basically sell something to the client on why we should move forward. So it was really challenging. I think overall, Toyota, having a massive presence in the U.S., they are a Japanese company, right? So they do have more of a conservative backbone. And it's a bit of a dichotomy, right? Because they want to be cutting edge, they want to be first to market, but they're also conservative. So there was no shortage of challenges, but collectively, we would really come together, come up with great ideas, demonstrate the why, and create some really beautiful, amazing work. Won a lot of rewards, so on and so forth. I think on the second part of your question is more around, because many people on this podcast and people that are starting to hear or already members of partnership leaders, a lot of great people out there. It's always trying to figure out, well, how do you get in the door, right?
Yeah.
And there's no easy answer there. I mean, I'll have to say it's not easy. I think we would get bombarded left and right, whether people would be showing up to the office or emails or so on and so forth. And I think at the end of the day, as many people might be more of that hunting approach, or you have team members that are doing that. That's really one of the things you have to do, but being strategic, right? So I think there would probably be a bucket of companies that we didn't know as much, and we could only speak to so many people. And so whether they have something thoughtful and more custom and creative in how they engage with us, or they have a really strong, warm introduction. Things of that nature tend to work. And eventually, especially because within Saatchi, right, they had people like myself who our job was to explore some of these things. We can't take a call with everybody, but we would field some of these calls if something was of value and it seemed to align with where things were at, with our current initiatives and our planning cycles and our fiscal years and so on. We'd invite them in, typically try to strive to bring attendance cross-functional, whether it be from creative directors, producers, people from the media team, from kind of client services. Client services team is also very important because they actually are the ones many of times being a bit of the messenger to the client and doing these lunch and learns, right? And you only have a short amount of time. So these lunches were always a way to drive people in, and whatever that the hot restaurant in at the time was helping to get people in. And then of course, on the other side of things, there is situations where we were chasing other people too, like Facebook or someone else. I remember years ago, we really just had a big push to do music initiatives. And SoundCloud probably had 12 to 15 people at the company. And I had to, download Skype on my computer. It wasn't so easy to go international. And I found one of the founders' phone numbers and called him in Berlin, and just kind of quite late for him in the evening, and was like, yeah, we want to do something with you. We want to pay you. And he said, well, look, we're kind of focused on product market fit right now. Like, we're not even interested in taking money. So we would also chase people too. So really just depends where you sit on the totem pole, and that's that.
Yeah. And so like, say, because I think we were really lucky at Optimizely that like, there was a moment in time where that kind of stuff was really exciting, okay, like data powered marketing, right? Like that became like a real moment in time, and it still is, right? It was like a transformation that happened, and now all marketers are like much more data savvy, and so Optimizely really rode that wave, and so it was. And we had like a quite recognizable brand. And so it wasn't too difficult for us to get those lunch and learns and those meetings. And so like from there, say for instance, someone gets in the door and they do some of the kind of like lunch and learn relationship development with some of these client services folks who are managing the relationships with their customers, like, and the client services person's like, hey, yeah, Toyota or XYZ company needs something like this, and we have the capabilities to be able to help deliver it. We want to bring it to them. Like, how does the tech company help bridge that gap? Because I feel like that's where most stuff gets stuck, is like, this sounds amazing, we can do it, our client has a need for it, and then it's like agency needs to take that vision to the client and get them excited about it, but also doesn't have the depth of knowledge and understanding that the tech company has of like selling it to the client, right? But the agency wants to protect the relationship, which is completely understandable. And so how does the tech company help bridge that gap and like enable the agency to get their customer excited about this potential initiative?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think that from what I've seen, maybe some years back when I was in this space versus where we are now, I do think things have changed to some extent, first of all. But really, back when we were doing that, right? It's the same thing in any types of partnership centric role or company, or if you have someone with direct sales. I mean, it's mission critical to find your champion, right? And because especially if you have other types of vendors or providers that are doing things of similar nature, people want to work with people that they like, that they can trust, establishing transparency, being able to be responsive. I couldn't tell you how many times that back then, right? We would, when the client wants something, they want something. And if someone would say they would have an SLA and they're going to get some response back to us and it wasn't timely, it would make us look good. And
Yeah.
that would not, if we're not looking good, then and there's other people that have points of view, then we're going to probably start looking at someone else. We're going to consider others. So it's like, if you have the attention, really hone in on that. If you don't have the answers, be communicative, and I think that word in itself is, I would say, is kind of one of my sort of core beliefs and principles is just strong communication always, in building that trust piece, right? I think that sometimes we would be in a situation too where we could only go so far as well. And it actually, as well, in the sense of being able to get buy-in from, from the client itself. And so it isn't always appropriate to introduce directly to the clients if they don't want to, because they're also getting bombarded directly from vendors and just a million other things going on too. But if someone, more likely on the more senior side, is really able to establish a relationship at the client side, whether they already have one, they could get an introduction, or they're meeting them out in the wild at a conference or something like that. So you're really beginning to have some trust from both sides, because there's many a times where sometimes a vendor would create a relationship directly, and then our client would then go back to us and say, hey, I really want you to look into this, I really want to look into that. That could go both ways too, because maybe we had someone else that we preferred. But I think at the end of the day, it's all about having that stakeholder ownership, finding those champions, and really kind of playing that fine line between adding value and not being pushy.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, having giving them the stuff that can make them look good. I really like that, and like that varies a lot, but like that I think that you really landed on something there where that is like the bringing something new to a client, like that's what agencies like Saatchi and Saatchi are always trying to do, right? Like they're always trying to show, hey, like we've got the new innovative thing, even if the client doesn't necessarily buy that thing, it's like, hey, we're ahead of the curve, and like this is why you work with us, type thing. And so like these client services people want to do that, but also like the downside risk, they're always minimizing downside risk, which is like, hey, we don't want to look bad, we don't want to damage the relationship with the client. And so it's always going to be like a really soft, hey, like there's this thing, like it could be interesting, but it's not going to be like we're going in and we're giving like the hard pitch on the brand new thing. And so like giving them the right level of stuff to make them look good, I think is a really smart one. And then like you said, like the timeliness of turnaround on things, I've found like across Amplitude and Optimizely, where we worked with a lot of agencies in both. When I ask people, oh, like, what do you like about working with us the most? Right? Like, is it the technology? Is it our partner program? Is it the team? Is it whatever else? Consistently, what I heard was, you're really fast to reply to us. Like you'll reply 24 hours a day, and like it's a really quick turnaround. So like when we get a question from the client, we'll send you a message and you get right back to us. And so like it's all just really snappy. And I guess that also comes back to the like looking good in front of the client. It's like, hey, if you can turn an answer around fast enough where the client services person can basically look like they knew the answer to the question because they answered so quickly, then that makes a big difference. What else, like, is there anything else we're missing? Or if there's like, hey, if this fits into their agenda and you give them the stuff that they can look good and you do really tight turnaround on comms or whatever else when they have questions, is there anything else that people have to hit, or are you in a really good spot with those?
Look, I think you've nailed and summarized things from a foundational perspective really well. But from the other side of things, when you're a vendor, I think everyone just needs to be mindful and always qualify, right? And at the end of the day, there could be something that someone at an agency or one of their consultancies are looking into, but they might not be the project owner. So you got to try to really figure out to qualify it and know when to, I wouldn't say quit, right? But how to manage your time. Time is one of your most valuable assets. And if you're doing everything in your power, then you might have to just allocate your time differently and go a different approach. And I think that's just a really important thing to always think about, because people could just string you along, and it just might be another opportunity that you need to put on the side. Because at the end of the day, something that I really, really found is when you're working with, with a startup or even a more developed technology company, it's, especially if they're publicly traded, they're everyone on those sidelines are really trying to hit their numbers and or make sure that they're getting their earnings and so on and so forth. But that's just not how it works on the other side of things. People are buying, they're buying on a different time cycle, and there could just be different priorities that shift. I mean, for example, in my when I was at Saatchi, we had at that point in time the largest recall of vehicles that ever took place. And so that was all hands on deck. I was actually part of the core team there, focusing on social media reputation management, and we had a social media war room back then, right? And we were producing content and figuring out all the sentiment analysis and all these different types of things. So it's like there was really no space to be thinking about buying or partnering with other types of companies. So I think some really it's really just you got to try to control what you have in control of, right? And when you start going down that agency route, sometimes they control the budgets and they have more decisions, and other times there's just a lot of chefs in the kitchen, as they say.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, ultimately, and even when I was on the other side of the business, some of the most myself and some of the people I've seen that have been most successful in creating partnerships, whether they be in a more strategic role or even from a sales perspective, is really making sure that you have strong relationships both directly on the client side and the agency side, because the agency, things could get pulled from underneath them as well too.
Yeah, amazing. And then so you shift gears and you go into these a couple of BD and sales type roles in the media space still, but on the technology side. And I'm interested to hear like what, if any, interaction did you then have with like media and digital agencies as you went into these like more revenue focused roles in the companies that you moved into?
Yeah, so being at Saatchi, you get a really nice view, maybe 30,000 foot view, even a bit lower on where the trends are going and what's going on and so on and so forth. And so I think ultimately I decided to take the leap of faith and was really captivated by some of the technologies that were out there, and being more working for a smaller organization, being on the ground floor, helping to develop technology, being the messenger, and actually going out there to deliver revenue and build on that mission. So for a handful of roles afterwards, uh, some companies I was involved with that had roots in Silicon Valley, and then also what was then coined early days. I think I was actually there when they coined it, Silicon Beach in Los Angeles. I was going across the country, meeting with agencies, meeting with clients directly, going to conferences, so on and so forth. So it was really was many of times really in the weeds. Sometimes you'd be meeting with media planners that are in their 20s. Other times you're meeting with executives, but just getting it out there. And it was very exciting for a couple of these roles, because at the end of the day, we were doing so much just for people to know who we are, right? Like who some of these companies were. And so, yeah.
And so tell me, like, when you were meeting with these media agencies, was because I know a lot of the time, at least this was my experience at the times, like the agencies were interested in buying software for themselves that they could use across their customers. And for us at Optimizely, we were like, hey, we would love for you to connect us with your customers so that they can buy our software, and we can have 20 customers rather than one.
Yeah.
Like, but I know that in the media space particularly, often it was like, hey, the agency is the customer, and that made like quite a lot of sense. And if you think about like how Google Analytics has set up their platform, or how Facebook, or a lot of these platforms that are quite high adoption by media agencies, it's like the media agency can basically be the customer on behalf of their customers. For you at that time, were you selling to the agencies, or were you already kind of thinking about, hey, I want to partner with these agencies to get to their customers?
Yeah, it's a great question. At that point in time, we were It was really a two-prong approach often because when in the media buying world, a large percentage of the pie was already being allocated to Google and a handful of other more mainstream publications out there, depending on who they wanted to reach from a target perspective. Um, and so there's always this idea of, if you were a smaller startup, which bucket can you be categorized in? Are you part of the core media buy? Are you part of more of a quote unquote experimental one? So on and so forth. So most of the time, there would be it would be working directly with the agency to actually get the sign off because they're owning the budget. But there's also plenty of times where, especially with one of the company I was with called Giant Media, where we were kind of a hybrid of a services and social earned media shop with a paid media component, where we would be working really, really closely with the client, because we were an extension of their agency in many ways. We had access to influencers back then, and this was before Instagram. Where they were actually people were writing earned media publication through PR. We did a lot of work with the Super Bowls out there, generating hundreds of millions of dollars worth of earned media out there. So it's once again kind of going to our earlier chat. It's sort of trying to figure out which client you're speaking to and how and which bucket you fall into. End of the day, you actually don't really want to fall into kind of this like new age experimental bucket because they have the least amount of money there. So you
Sure.
want to kind of we would always strive to be something that was more key and core to their initiatives, um, specific to the handful of ad tech companies I was part of. And one of the reasons why I actually segued eventually out of that space was that the media industry is not software as a service, right? So it's really a bit of many parts of the media um, industry where people are buying. They're buying impressions, they're buying videos,
Yeah.
all these different types of things, producing content, things of that nature. Whereas, like, if you were buying an optometrist, I can't pronounce. You pronounce the name of your old company, Optimize.
Optimizely. Optimizely.
Optimizely, exactly. There's so many names out there. If you're buying
Yeah.
Optimizely, or when I segued into Oracle, Oracle was actually, they bought a number of companies, one of which I actually helped purchase them for Toyota, which was Vitru, which is an SRM, social relationship management software SaaS license. So it's very different in the media space. They have to keep going back, and it's a hamster wheel. So the agencies, for many years, they didn't have as much experience actually buying software as a service. And a lot of that would actually pivot over to the client direct. And that's when the agencies had to really smarten up quickly. You had the Accentures and Deloittes of the world jumping into this space. And they had to wisen up, in Salesforce and so on. And that was actually one of the reasons why I decided to kind of segue. I like the idea of, while it could be much longer sales cycles or partnership cycles, to get a piece of technology into a company, it felt much more fulfilling to be part of a 2 year, 3 year, even 5 year partnership where you could really grow with the company. And I think that's where the industry has gone quite a lot, obviously, in the past decade.
Yeah, I love that. And so tell me a little bit about, so you were at MediaBricks, who got acquired by Verve, and then did I hear right that Oracle then acquired Verve, or how did you end up at Oracle?
Yeah, so I was actually fortunately, part of a couple ad tech companies that I got acquired. One of them, Giant Media, too, self funded. We went through all the funding cycles. We ended up getting acquired for a nice sum. Um, MediaBricks also is another one that we actually had a fair amount of fundraising. But the way I ended up at Oracle actually is one of the execs from Vitru, which Oracle acquired. We had crossed paths while I was at Saatchi, and he'd reached out and said, "Look, um, I know that, like, you kind of have more of a startup bug, and you like to be part of these ground floor teams, but we're really operating more, at least in this point in time, as an independent entity within the Oracle umbrella. And, we could really use someone with your skills and your background and so on and so forth." And honestly speaking, about the majority of any consulting gig or full time role that I've been with has been through my relationships. Like I would say that there hasn't been a situation where I'm like just going out and applying or something like that. The opportunities have come to me, and of course, like there's many things out there, and or if you have an intention and a manifestation of where you want to take your career, um, really getting out there in front of people is always helpful. But yeah, this opportunity came to me. I was considering moving into more of a B2B or a B2B and B2C hybrid role with software as a service. It didn't really fit all the boxes per se of being like a startup with a big equity upside. But I ended up going for it. It worked out really well for me, especially financially. Was part of a strategic team that was kind of a hybrid of alliances and also doing some direct sales. And we were part of some massive, massive deals that year, and it was incredible.
Amazing, amazing. And so I want to talk more about like building and nurturing a personal network, because I think that that's like a bit of a superpower for you. But before we jump onto that subject, and don't let me forget about coming back to it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so you went through a couple of acquisitions. Obviously, like you're you've got these roles as like a VP of business development and sales, like a director of business development and sales. And so I imagine you're like, uh, you're out there, you're closing deals, you're also building relationships and advocating for the business. How much, if at all, did you have visibility into these the acquisitions or transactions that happened at these companies? Like, and maybe you could tell me a little bit about like, what was the relationship between the acquirer and the company that you were working at? Was that like a pre-existing relationship, or was it like a company that was just looking for something in the space and reached out to you guys? I'm interested in hearing about those.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, so the two ad tech companies I was part of that had some acquisitions. Both of those acquisitions, well, I wasn't actually at one of the companies when it took place, right? But nonetheless, there's in the media space, there's just been a lot of consolidation. I think for the first one with Giant Media, and this is something that I have a pretty strong point of view on too, is especially for those founders out there, right? Is that we, in many ways, for an acquirer, we looked kind of cheap, and we were able to be in a position to be acquired for quote unquote cheaper because we didn't raise hundreds and millions of dollars, right? And that's a challenge I think with a lot of companies that are starting. If you raise too much money and you have VCs and LPs and so on and so forth, they need to be acquired for a certain amount of money for it to be meaningful. I think for Giant Media, there wasn't necessarily a situation where they were, looking to be acquired right away. But when you get an offer and if the company could kind of be integrated into a larger portfolio offering, have more salespeople, have more resources, produce more engineering, and that's basically what happening. There was no shortage of companies that had reached out to them at that point in time. I myself wasn't intimately involved in that actual due diligence process, but I think especially if the company is a little bit on the smaller end, the organization had a level of being a flat to some extent. Everyone, I've been in different types of companies if where it feels like there could be secrecy and what is actually going on, and I could tell you, particularly in that moment in time in that particular company, there was a real strong sense of community and kind of a team effort because there's so much transparency internally, and it was a nice outcome. MediaBricks was a bit of a different situation. They had raised a lot of money, and they'd been kind of trucking along, and things were changing in the market, and they ended up getting acquired by another company too, where they could take their clients. I think that was one of the things too, right? Being able to get access to their clients, some of their IP, so on and so forth.
That's awesome. And so, yeah, tell us a little bit more about building and nurturing your personal relationships. Because I'll give an example. Like, I was in Austin for one of our partnership leaders meetups, which was awesome and had a great time. And you reached out to me and was like, "Hey, I see that you're going to be in Austin. You up for hanging out?" And I was like, "Yeah, that sounds amazing." And like we hung out and had a great chat and had a drink, and like we're still like in regular contact since then, which has been awesome. And I get the feeling that this is probably a recurring theme for you, where like you have a bit of a superpower around this, and obviously like, hey, these types of relationships are extremely valuable as a partnerships person as well, right? And so like if you can build and nurture relationships that you can not that hey like these are transactions that you want to be able to lean on, but like hey, it does so fortuitously happen that often these are outside of just personal stuff, like great business relationships as well. So I'm interested to just hear a little bit about how you think about these, like how proactive it is versus like organic for you, and then like what are some of the things that you do to like build and nurture these relationships.
Yeah, definitely. Look, I actually am a strong believer that for many things in life, not everything, it's actually learnable, right? I do believe that there is some level of innate qualities for myself that, being fairly extroverted, that it came somewhat natural, but my methodology, which is probably somewhat even more subconscious to some extent, has been refined, right? I think earlier in my career, you could show passion, and especially if you're doing like sales or something, and you're trying to create relationships. But I wouldn't find the reciprocity always being as equal. And my point of view is really everyone's just human. Everyone's just a person, and really having this strong human centric mindset when you're talking to people. Whether it's finding these connection points. It's not really having an agenda, not having expectations on an outcome, and just being a real active listener. Being an active listener to someone, asking smart, open ended questions that you just that and being curious. I've naturally been very curious throughout my life, which has kind of guided me into different project work, into different personal endeavors and traveling and so on. And I'm curious about people and cultures and what makes them tick. So kind of taking that mindset when I'm speaking to people and just connecting with them. You being European, you might be able to relate to this. And I actually lived in Barcelona for a couple of years, where I was doing, one of my entrepreneurial endeavors, doing some innovation consulting, and also went to grad school. But I would say living in Europe and in Spain, probably the fifth question might be, what do you do for a living? And so on and so forth. Right. And then in the US, I feel like it could even be refreshing when that is not taking place. Who are you as a person? What are you into? Like, what do you like? Just being real.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And it's very true. And I've seen people, not just in Europe, I've seen a lot of people talk about, almost like the inverse of the San Francisco effect. Not to say anything bad about San Francisco,
Yeah.
and I think the Silicon Valley culture is amazing, but like there's definitely like a level of culture that is homogenous there, where like you kind of default to what startup do you work at, like what fundraising round are they on, like how many people work there, like and you go into basically like go to market strategy conversations with everyone that you meet, rather than like really getting to know people. And like I do feel like I built a lot of amazing relationships there, and also like a lot of those relationships were based on that kind of like that work level conversation with people. And like yeah, going I've seen a lot of people talk about how refreshing it is when they moved out of San Francisco, that like I live in Seattle now, and I have a couple of friends that work in tech, but like most people don't. And so yeah, you're not talking about hey, like how do you install, like how are you in like marketing your solar panel installing business, or like do you plan to raise money? It's like that would be a really weird conversation to have, and so it forces you to get to know people better, which I think is really amazing. Something that I've noticed with you is like, so you have like you attend like an executive summit at sea, and then also you have like you're a member of partnership leaders, you're also a member of a social club also. Like I hope you don't mind me sharing, like like you attend like a popular festival in the desert, and these are all things that I feel like increase your surface area for meeting interesting people.
Yeah.
right? Like all of these types of things that you're opting into, it's like, okay, you're much more likely to meet interesting people by doing these things than you would be if you just like tried to make conversations at the coffee shop or whatever, right? And so is that something where it's just like, hey, you're an interesting person and you like to hang around with interesting people? Or is that also something where you're like, hey, I just want to increase my surface area? Like going to study in Barcelona, as an example, is probably something that an interesting person does, but I'm interested in like whether that's something that was a proactive thing or you just like to do stuff that's like non traditional.
Yeah. I'm first generation American, and I think both my parents are from abroad, and I've always been captivated by different cultures and food and who you name it, right? All these different types of things. So I think that's been a bit of a north star for me. When I went to grad school, I only applied to one school, and it was in Barcelona, and I got into it, and I went there, and your energy goes where your attentions are, and so it's really having a vision and coming up with a clarity and even having like what was your purpose, right? So going to these, being part of different communities, whether it be summits, or going to music festivals, or just even more. I have a very strong mindfulness practice as well, and being part of people within kind of these spiritual communities. Those are some of my passions, and I think when you're passionate about something, and then you kind of engage in these different areas, you could end up walking away with much stronger connections with people, human connections. And going and kind of stepping back to what we were saying before, a lot of these connections, when you're meeting people, you're not necessarily focused on, well, how could this person help me, or what do you do, right? And I've totally played that game, and I think it's valid, right? You only have so much time in the day, and I get very excited about being around smart people. But people could be smart in many different ways, right? They could change careers, and then maybe there could be some connection points. So my view is really, if you're able to learn about who someone is a bit more and make some mental notes, or I even use technology at times for certain things, and kind of create processes around how to touch base with people, once or twice out of the year, and make introductions with zero expectations. If there's something that could help them personally and professionally, or these two people could benefit from knowing one another, or there's an article that I'm seeing that I think could be helpful for the company that they're building, or if they're a leader in somewhere else. That's just the way I think about things of life in general. And of course, having all these different types of stimulus and exposure through the things and how I invest in my personal time is very helpful. I think for me, I really consider myself a lifelong learner. I spend meaningful amounts of money in my own personal development, whether it be learning a new language, whether it be working with my own communication styles, or attending conferences as well. And it just keeps you smart, keeps you interesting, and you have more things to talk about. And that's just what gets me excited.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. I love that. And I love what you talked about, like being a connector of people. Because like, I mean, I can't remember which, but I think it's the five dysfunctions of a team. Maybe however many dysfunctions of the team there are, there's probably more than five of them on most of the teams I've worked on. But like I think it's in that book where they talk about like forming tripods or like being a connector of people and how like if you can if you can like basically be the third leg on the stool or whatever and like help connect other people, like the value creation for those people from that is like it's like just such a fantastic deed to do, and it's like a very low lift for you, because those two people create all of the value still, but like you can kind of somehow participate in it with them, and like I took that on board from that, and it has been like extremely valuable in my career. And then I worked in venture capital for a bit, and I was like, wow, this is like all VCs do. Also, like they get deal flow from people who invested earlier than them, who are connecting them with people as
Yeah.
like a value add, right? And then they invest, hopefully, and then what they do is they connect them with other people, like where it's like, hey,
Yeah.
there's this executive in my network that is looking for a role. Also, there's a founder in my network that's looking to hire a new CRO. And it's like, great, I'm going to connect those two people and I'm going to add value to both of them. Or like, hey, there's a founder that's looking to raise a round and there's a VC that's looking to do like growth stage investing. Like, I'm going to connect those two people and I'm going to create a bunch of value. Or like, however it is, like that's how that whole industry operates. And so, yeah, it's really cool that you're thinking in that kind of framework and mindset. And like, it does create a bunch of value. And also, I think I really like that you're not setting out with that transaction in mind. Like, intrinsically that like good things happen when you connect good people, but not like, oh, what do I get from this? It's just like it's creating more good in the world. That's really awesome. Well, Gil, unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. But it's been an absolutely amazing conversation. So I really, really, really appreciate the time. And I think people are going to get a lot from this. So I think on behalf of everyone else as well, I thank you for kind of showing up and sharing with us. And I feel like, hey, me doing this interview with you has helped me get to know you better as well, which is an awesome benefit. So thank you so much.
Yeah, really appreciate the time here. It's been amazing seeing your guys' journey too, building partnership leaders. Joined during COVID and it was just getting started, and very excited to see where you guys take it. And of course, I'm only a phone call away to help you guys out with anything you need.
Amazing. Well, thank you for that too.